Hi, Andy. We're so excited to have you on today's episode and to learn a little more about your career journey. So, thank you so much for being here. It's lovely to meet you.
Hi, nice to meet you too. I'm Andy, super excited to be talking with you guys today. And I guess it's a really quick intro. I'm currently just graduated April 2023 from Ivey and Western, studied both medical sciences and business at Ivey, and I'll be going full time to Oliver Wyman starting next April.
Amazing. Thank you for the intro. It's lovely to learn more about you. So, I'd also love to start from the very beginning for our first question, Andy. How did your post secondary experience lead you to where you are today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think post-secondary definitely was the biggest, I guess, time in my life where decisions were being made. I was discovering more about what I wanted to do, what I enjoyed. And a lot of things come down to a lot of my interests and what I chose to explore outside of school, actually. So, starting off with my first 2 years, I was studying med sci, and that's because I do have an interest in medicine and science in general. And that's where I started. But I always knew I wanted to explore Ivy and see what the business world had for me. So, even just starting post secondary, I had that kind of pathway in mind. But I think throughout post secondary, I involved myself in a lot of extracurriculars, and those were usually more based on my interests, so whether it was my culture, some more hobby interests, or other things. I realized that I really enjoyed just working on things, anything as long as it involved what I was interested in. And for that, that meant like maybe running a club that was based around an interest or running initiatives or anything else. And the thing that excited me most about that was I was able to always take on a variety of roles, put on a lot of different hats to do a lot of different jobs around what I was involving myself in. And I think that's something that's very similar to consulting. So I remember the summer before I started Ivy, I was really thinking about what I wanted to do. And there was this consulting workshop early on, listened to it and went to it. And just the way they describe consulting, I felt like fit the type of work I really enjoy doing throughout my extracurriculars. So I'd say my extracurriculars were definitely the biggest thing in post-secondary that kind of led me to where I am today.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. That's awesome that your career that you chose was based on things that you learned in post secondary. I feel that's where a lot of youth also find that they'll find what their career journey holds for them as well. I'm going to pass it off to Raj for the next few questions.
Hey, Andy, so for the second question, you already answered a bit of it, but we can go over it again. How did you end up in the consulting career path? Was this always the goal, or did you have different interests, such as working in esports or medicine?
Yeah, that's a great question, Raj. I came into university wanting to make sure I explored, but I really had no idea what I would do. And I mean, going for med school and being a doctor was a pathway that I was interested in, and doing something business related was something I was always interested in, but I wasn't too sure. But I think once I started thinking about recruiting the summer before Ivy, that's when it became the goal. When I heard about consulting, it just made a lot of sense to me. It feels like it was kind of the job I don't know if I'd say meant for, but just the job that fit my skills and interests the best. And the truth is I still have a lot of interest in working in different fields. So you mentioned like medicine or esports. And I think I love these things and I love like kind of dabbling in them, whether it's going to be on the side or as a job. And the way I see it now with my path is, or at least in my career trajectory, is I see that I'll kind of explore esports and other similar things I'm interested in on the side, whether that's in a paid or volunteer capacity. And then things like medicine, I can also find ways to incorporate that in my job, such as doing healthcare projects with healthcare clients. And in the future, I'm still unsure if I want to stay in consulting or if I want to exit into industry after. And I think my exits, if I do choose to exit, will be very involved or very similar to some of my other interests. So I think these aren't pathways, but more so kind of just other things I want to explore and keep in mind and can see myself working in the future.
Great answer, Andy. It's always nice to keep your hobbies close to you if you have interest in them. For the next question, you have a lot of post-secondary extracurricular experience, such as being the president of a few clubs, playing classical music and sports in your free time. How did you manage your time to balance all these things with doing Ivy and MedSci?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think especially when it comes to being an IB in business, recruiting is almost seen, I guess it really is just another extracurricular in terms of the time. And I think those are, yeah, there's just a lot to balance in school. And I'd say a few things helped me along the way. Number one, definitely learning to prioritize. And that's something you're just consistently working on. And post-secondary is always a really big shock for people. And I think it was for me too. So really learning what things I valued and what was more on the back burner was really important for me. The next thing was learning to sacrifice. So after being able to prioritize and learning better how to value what was on my plate, I think being able to accept that I had to make sacrifices and pull the trigger on those and really just really choose to do that was definitely another big one that helped me. So, for example, sometimes I knew if I was really swamped with recruiting, I might have to sacrifice a few coffee chats because I wouldn't have time to do them, or I might have to sacrifice something on my coursework side. So maybe not being able to do an Ivey case for a few classes for a week. I think those things are really important to recognize that and just to have the will to be able to do that. But I think at the end of the day, the most important thing I'd say is definitely discipline. Less so this last year, since I'd say it was honestly a more senioritis year for me, but especially years 3 to 4, so HBA1 and HBA2 for me in Ivy, was just making sure I had a lot of discipline to get things done. So I would find myself after school or after classes ended, sitting down and saying, hey, like before dinner, I'm not going to do anything that's more on the enjoyment side or social side. I'm just going to sit down, get these things done, and kind of plan out the next few hours. And for me, I always would make sure I spent around a good chunk on club work, especially for the clubs that I was president of, but also making sure I got some recruiting time in. And then for coursework, at the very least, planning out what coursework I was going to get done for the next day and talking with friends and coordinating with them to see if there's anything we can help each other with. So I think discipline was definitely the biggest one. And then I sacrificed a lot of social time in my first to fourth year. And fifth year, it's funny because my friends would say, oh, Andy, I'm seeing you so much more this year. And it's all because I think I was able to loosen up after signing my full-time offer and just spend more time with friends, valuing my friendships. And yeah, I think the discipline from years 1 to 4 paid off a lot and being able to know to sacrifice things. And then having that year at the end for me to kind of build back up my friendships and relationships and other things is really great.
Great answer. Discipline always leads to more progress than motivation, anyways. For my next question, what about consulting inspires you? Are there any misconceptions you might have had before you've had experience in the industry?
Yeah, I think consulting is really inspiring for a lot of the reasons that you'll see other people say they're inspired or kind of interested in consulting. I wouldn't say my answer is too unique, but I think it's always good to kind of reinforce this that these are the things that stand out to somebody looking into consulting, then that's something that's good for them to hear. Number one is definitely the high level work we do. I think it's so cool to be able to come into a company fresh out of university and just be able to work on some of the highest level problems that are affecting like the C-suite or high level employees at a company, especially even working with private equity firms. You're making decisions on whole companies, and in this case, their portfolio companies too, which is really interesting. So I think that's definitely one thing, just feeling like you can make such a big impact right off the bat. And that's really inspiring for me. Number two is, I guess, the nature of the work, which is very challenging, but also has such a big variety and range. We get to work on anything in any industry, depending on the firm you're at. But for me, I'm at a more generalist firm. So, I mean, doing financial services, healthcare work, maybe a bit of public sector, private equity. There's just so many options there. And again, like I said, I find myself more interested in doing any sort of work that's just kind of interesting to me and not really wanting to pigeonhole myself into one industry or anything. So that's one thing I really appreciate about consulting. And the work is challenging and always different. So that's nice. It's not like more of your cookie cutter office jobs where you might be doing something very similar day in, day out. We're consistently on new projects, working with new clients. So we're always trying to understand the client dynamic, their goals, their needs, and their company, and trying to assist them in the best way we can. And then finally, another great thing is consulting is filled with great people, smart people, and these people always go on to do great things. So I think it's such a great way to start off your career by meeting just as many people as you can who have like big goals in mind for their career, big dreams in mind, and being able to build relationships with them because that means later on I can find myself working with them, working for them, or they're working for me or anything like of the sort. And it'd just be cool to be able to have that network and opportunity available for me. So those are definitely some of the biggest things that inspire me about consulting. In terms of misconceptions, I think one thing that still travels around a lot is people think there's a heavy Monday to Thursday travel schedule. And I think post-COVID, that's completely different now. And that's what people hear a lot when they talk to real consultants. Most firms who used to do Monday to Thursday travel don't do that anymore. And in fact, firms are very different in terms of their traveling. So I'd say always make sure you talk with people or do your research beforehand when you're looking to firms to find the ones that fit you more in terms of travel. But I'd say travel isn't the only thing. A lot of people don't realize that the staffing model is something that changes your experience completely. For example, all over Wyman, we have a North American staffing model. We have one pool of North American consultants and then a pool of North American projects, and they're matching all across. So it's not kind of split by Canada and the US. What that means is I'm going to be on projects for the US a lot, going to travel around SF, New York, or anywhere else we have an OW office or client. And that's going to be really fun for me. But I know some people recruiting might find that something they don't enjoy. They might enjoy that too, or they might want something more. For example, a more international staffing model where they're going to fly out of North America. So I think that's something to really think about.
Great consulting insights. I'm pretty sure the listeners will really care about that. I'd like to pass it back to Sophie for the last question.
Thank you, Raj, and thank you, Andy, for all of those really great insights. I really enjoyed them. Our last question for you today is, what advice would you give to someone aspiring to become a consultant in today's market? And is there anything that you wish you had done differently in your career path?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sophie. I think thinking back to when I was recruiting and aspiring to become a consultant, I definitely would have wanted to hear a few things. Number one was definitely explore your interests. I think as somebody in a more senior, or I guess just a bit older now and having recruited, I see a lot of people explore things not because they're interested, but because they think it's the right thing to do to aim for a career in business, IB, or consulting. And I'm talking about people who might spend a lot of time on more business clubs, whether it's an investment club or pre-business networks or anything. And I think that's completely fine if you're interested. That's great. You build such a great network there. But I think what stands out in your interview process and your coffee chats or anything is having a lot of different hobbies that make you unique, whether or not that's a specific sport, specific, I guess, like music or anything else type of hobby. That's always going to make you more unique and memorable. And again, I think the experiences I had really shined because they were more unique things that I genuinely was interested in and could talk about forever in an interview or just in a chat, and always found ways to kind of progress my level of involvement. So starting off as a club exec or a volunteer and moving my way up to be able to manage a club or anything else was something that really helped me stand out, I think, in my interviews. The other thing I think I would have actually really preferred to hear or appreciated hearing is that it's not actually too important to have a non-business related internship before you recruit for consulting. However, it is a nice to have. So I personally didn't do anything before. I just worked at summer camps or retail pop-ups, but I never had a more consistent, stable job that was more business related. And that's completely fine. Students aspiring to become consultants should know that that's fine, but they should also know that if they have the opportunity to look and to be able to work in a similar internship, I think it's definitely a nice to have that helps get your foot in the door for interviews or anything else. So it's always good to know that. So I'd say for me, differently in my past, I wish I could have found a job more like that. However, I'm not too regretful about it because I don't think it's a requirement for sure.
Amazing. Yeah, that's really great insight for our listeners to gauge their interests and pursue clubs so that they can really see what they're passionate about and good at doing. So I think that's really great insight. And that's the last question that we have for you today, Andy. So thank you so much for being a guest on the cast today. I'm sure our listeners will really benefit from all of the advice and insights that you've shared. And we really appreciate your time today.
Great. Really enjoyed this.